Hello, everyone. Welcome to the webinar, introducing the stack of the future for modern data leaders. I'm Andrew Muller, the CMO of Starschema. Let me tell you a little bit about Starschema. We are a professional services firm that helps data leaders and their organizations to use their data to make better business decisions, build smarter products, and deliver more value. We often implement emerging technology solutions to answer novel or difficult challenges, and we provide managed services for data platforms and team extension for most data needs. I'd like to thank our partners, Snowflake and ThoughtSpot, for joining us to bring you this webinar. During the webinar, we're going to take a look at the modern data stack and how it has come together, the role of publicly available data sets, and how Snowflake's Data Marketplace makes it easy to share and use data. And finally, how adding ThoughtSpot brings it all together to empower faster and better decisions. One thing before we begin, we enabled Q&A for the webinar. If you have a question for any of the panelists, please use the Q&A and we'll try to get to them towards the end of the webinar. So with that, I'd like to introduce our speakers. We have Justin Langseth with Snowflake. He is the CTO of the Data Exchange. We also have Sean Zinsmeister, VP of Product for ThoughtSpot, and Chris von Chalfovai, VP of Special Projects at Starschema. And with that, let me hand this over to Chris.
Oops. Hello, and good morning, afternoon, or evening, whichever it is in your time zone. And thank you very much, Andrew, for inviting me. In this presentation, I will be talking about the data stack of the future, as you can see, and what we are doing in respect of that data stack at Starschema. I think there's a lot here that's an interesting development in many ways, and there are many things that we have over the last, I would say, decade or so in this field learned about how data stacks work best. So quickly about me, I'm, as Sandra said, the VP of Special Projects at Starschema. We're based in Arlington, Virginia. Previously, I worked in various roles. I worked in biosecurity. I used to work for the UK government, and I had a number of senior roles in large enterprise companies, eventually ending up at Starschema on the dark side of the business, as they say. It's a lot more fun, a lot more interesting here. So let's just go through what are the basic underlying fundamentals, the concepts that drive this. And perhaps the first such concept is, what's a stack? Well, the stack is a number of components that are integrated as a coherent whole for a defined design purpose. So let me just mull on that a little bit. The stack is not heaping just a bunch of components on top of each other. They have to be integrated in some way or another to a coherent purpose. This is an example of a stack, and it's a stack of pancakes. They are a little bit heaped on top of each other, and I believe the purpose for that is deliciousness. So as you can see, you have the individual layers of the stack. You have a presentation layer on top, which is how people interact with your stack most of the time. And then there's the whipped cream in the back, which is the system integrator. And there's going to be a little bit of talk about system integration later. So what's the history of these stacks? Well, stacks are a relatively new concept that have grown out, at least in data new, and has grown out from the last 20 years of development. So the 2000s, you had very monolithic structures. Yeah, as they used to say, nobody gets fired for buying IBM, and you had a single vendor who had a solution, usually a stack of their own, by the way, but that was sold as a bulk, a single coherent or more or less coherent system. And you were kind of locked into that, and that caused a little bit of dissatisfaction. So the pendulum swung the other way in the 2010s. And you suddenly, instead of having one stack, you had a million little components, and you were kind of expected to build your own stack from that. At the very least, you were expected to create some sort of fundamental idea and find the right tool for that. At the same time, all the tools looked for how they could encroach on the layers above or below where they used to be typically used. So it was a bit of a chaotic time. Now, during this time, there was quite a bit of hype going on. It was a decade of overpromises and unnecessary risks. There's also a lot of very solid development. And that's when Oracle, IBM, and SAP, the classical big leaders, were essentially displaced in this field by Amazon, Google, and Microsoft, especially with their cloud offerings. And you saw the emergence of dynamic companies, great companies that have figured out their niche in a layer and placed themselves within that layer quite accurately, becoming eventually, for visionaries and challengers, become eventually leaders. And we have two of them on this webinar today, ThoughtSpot and Snowflake, and we're very pleased to be partners with. But other partners we have, like Matillion or HVR, are also quite similar in terms of their ability to turn small single layer level vendor approaches into enterprise ready offerings. So what is the stack of the future? Well, there are a couple of key trends that look like they're governing how data stacks behave. Well, one of them is that we continue to have heterogeneous stacks. So what this means is there's an emphasis on integration and integrability. There are now more or less a couple of common ways of information interchange, REST APIs and SQL at a relatively base level queries. Everybody wants to use the best tool for their use case, and good vendors don't want to solve every problem in the world. They want to solve one problem well. So as they say, the fox knows many things, the hedgehog knows one big and important thing. So we've gone from foxes who try to do everything to hedgehogs who know one thing, but know that one thing very well, and can become essentially parts of your stack within where they're the most competent. Cloud adoption is a key and important driver in this field. Elasticity is a key aspect, and there will be a lot of demand for DevOps because DevOps is essentially the glue that ties these stacks together. So DevOps is what gives rise to the stack itself by architecting them and the way they interact. And DevOps is also what essentially creates the interconnectivity that makes a stack worthwhile. There's a lot of focus on calculated risks and innovation, and with emerging technologies that give you advantages at higher risk levels, there are leading companies right now that currently look to companies like Snowflake and companies like ThoughtSpot as visionaries who are becoming leaders or who have become leaders in particular fields. And I think this is something that we can expect. We can expect to see these names in the data stack of future. It's quite hard to imagine one without Snowflake at this point. Now, there's also a greater focus on data democratization. So elements in the stack that offer an easy to use endpoint for not necessarily the most sophisticated users technologically, but to analysts, to essentially everybody. And of course, we're seeing the role of artificial intelligence in curation and consumption. Now, these stacks are, of course, developments towards going holistic, so going from internal data to all data, including external data. This is, that's why we're so very happy to have Sean here from Snowflake Data Exchange, because Data Exchange is essentially a fantastic demonstration of what this all data level of integration can look like if done well. And of course, ingestion is always a big issue. So agile methodologies in ingestion and commoditization of external data will always be a paramount task. Now, just as an example, because I mentioned the data exchange, we have been fortunate to be able to share significant amounts of data on the COVID-19 outbreak. This is quite close to my heart. I'm an epidemiologist by background. I specialized in blood-borne diseases, so this is very much hitting close to home. And what we saw was, of course, that a lot of companies had their own data about operations, but there was so much scattering, there was so much divergence and diversity of external data sources. And a lot of those data sources were not necessarily based along these the same key identifiers. So we have collected these data sources from various sources. We have created transformation code that was automatically deployed via GitHub's GitHub tasks. We did a code in Python. Apache Airflow was essentially the engine for keeping this whole thing running, and via Snowflake's Data Exchange, we have been able to share this with a lot of Snowflake's customers, many high-profile companies, and I think this is just a fantastic illustration of what external data is and how external data factors into the data stack of the future. That the data stack of the future isn't just a stack of tools and a stack of ETL algorithms in a runner for them. It also includes marketplaces for data. And again, this is why it's fantastic to have Sean here, and Justin, whose company has done some amazing stuff with it. Now, the golden rivet to these stacks, and if you're not familiar with the concept of the golden rivet, they say that it's every ship has somewhere a golden rivet, technically the last that you put in there, which sort of holds all of it together. And if that one bursts or goes out of place, the whole thing collapses. So what's the one thing that holds all of these together? Well, the answer is system integrators. We're a system integrator. This is what we do for a living. We hold up, we create these stacks and we make them work. A good system integrator can be incredibly valuable. We can act both as trusted advisors in selecting what goes in your stack, so curating your stack, so to speak, as well as designing the layers and components and writing the glue code that sort of makes the whole thing fit together neatly and ensures that data is processed well and integrated well. System integration really is an art, and it's the art of selecting and integrating the right components. And there's a lot of time, money, and heartbreak that we can that we can save our customers, and we do that on a day-to-day basis. We basically make their life easier by helping them not invest in technologies that are not appropriate for them, invest in the technologies that are, and making them all fit together. So it's the whole is stronger and more valuable than the sum of its parts, and a good deal of that is good system integration. Now, to conclude, and this was just an introduction into stacks and data stacks and the data and what we think the driving trends of the future are. Stacks themselves are rapidly becoming the guiding idea of data and data management in the future. Stacks are not so much a thing, they're a perspective. They're a way you think about what you have and how you put them together and integrate them together into a coherent whole that you then use. There's a lot that these stacks can now contribute. There are a lot fewer possible components than you used to have during those heady years of the 2010s, where you used to have a lot of, I would say, quite a bit of over promises. I think now you can pick and choose from the market with a lot more confidence, because the visionaries from then, who at the same time match their vision with a good ability to execute, such as Snowflake, such as ThoughtSpot, they're the ones who have become solid participants on this market. We help our customers leverage the strength of these interdependent layers, where they're provided by Snowflake or ThoughtSpot or any of our other partners, by starting with the design, by looking at the needs and areas of responsibility and defining them accurately, by selecting what the most appropriate tools are, by integrating them and allowing our customers to win through leveraging the strongest tools for each task, where they are the strongest for the particular task. And with that, I think I'm going to turn over to Sean. Are you on first?
I think this is Justin. I'm up next.
It's
Justin, in that case, thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Let me turn on my video, share my screen. Chris, if you could stop sharing, that would help me share my screen.
Yes.
Thank you.
I just don't know how. Just give me 1 second.
Look for the little green thing.
Yes, it says.
There we go. We're good to go now. All right. Great. And can you still see my screen, guys, now that it's in full mode here?
Yeah, it looks great.
All good.
Great, perfect. Thanks so much for that starting point on the stacks of the future. There's one aspect to the stack that is kind of a new aspect that we're starting to think about at Snowflake, which is not just the place you underlyingly store the data or the software that operates on top of the data or the mechanism to get data in, but it's also kind of the top layer is the data itself. And traditionally in data warehousing, the bulk of data has come from internally from an organization. And what we've seen recently is an explosion in data from external parties that can be brought into a data cloud or data warehouse environment and analyzed together with a company's own data in order to help them understand what they're seeing in their business in the context of what's going on in the rest of the world from a whole variety of perspectives. This has been happening. This isn't entirely new. There have been people on Wall Street in particular selling data for over 100 years. You know, the S&Ps and Nielsen's and ComScores of the world have been providing data commercially for a long time, but we've been seeing just over the last 10 or so years a massive explosion in kind of traditional data providers, but also in what's known as new or alternative data providers. People who have new types of data that maybe have never existed before that can be combined with, analyzed together, and machine learned together with the company's own data to help broaden understanding of what's going on. And that's been very demonstrated recently with the coronavirus outbreak and every company in the world's desire to understand that and importantly, how it impacts their business and to be able to predict what's going to happen next using tools like Snowflake, like ThoughtSpot, like machine learning tools, and any other really great tool that can sit on top of these stacks. So using these tools on top of your own data is interesting to kind of know what happened. But in the context of layering what's happening in the rest of the world, it can add a huge amount of value. And that's what we've been seeing recently. And it was great to work with ThoughtSpot to get some of this coronavirus data and other data supporting it onto the Snowflake Data Marketplace. And we'll talk about that here in a second as well. If I can advance my slide, there we go. So when you start thinking about data and what kind of data you might want to add to your data environment or make accessible from your data environment beyond the data that you're already bringing in from your internal sources, there's a lot of different challenges people encounter. Oftentimes they never start doing it at all for some of the reasons here, but even more importantly, sometimes they just don't know it's a possibility. It's kind of a discoverability problem. It's like in the App Store on the iPhone. There's so many apps in there. It's hard for people to go in and discover them and figure out which one might be good for them. And it's especially hard for people who have valuable applications that they're trying to get noticed. Being one data provider or one app in a sea of others is a challenge, and generally leads to less adoption of these data sets than is potentially possible. So from beyond discoverability, which the Snowflake Data Marketplace I'll talk about in a second, and that's where Starschema has made their data available very successfully. So the answer to the discovery problem, well, at least our perspective on it will come in a few minutes. These underlying problems are also friction points in terms of any company trying to source and bring in data from external sources. The complexity of just figuring out how to bring the data in physically. Is it coming in through FTP, through S3, through APIs, what have you? Pretty much every underlying provider has a different delivery mechanism, or even if they're using an API, their APIs all work differently, or if they're using S3 to deliver data, underlying that, there might be different file formats, and even inside of file, there might be different structures and delimiters and fields and stuff. So it's kind of generally complex to think about bringing data in that's not coming from one of your existing internal systems. That's not easy either, but most companies have kind of already figured that part out. But trying to apply that to data that you don't even know anything about because it's being generated by somebody else, that extends that complexity. Also, there's cost to oftentimes not only acquire the data. Starschema has very nicely made all the data that they've been putting together free, and many of it comes from original sources that are kind of open source sources as well. So there's a lot of kind of open and free data in the world, but there's also a lot of commercially paid data. And even if the data is free or open, there's still a lot of costs that most companies would incur trying to, again, based on the complexity aspects, do all that connection, loading, mounting, transforming, et cetera. So since it's costly and challenging to find data that's useful, to know if it's going to be useful to you, to even know if the underlying data is valid or correct since you didn't generate it yourself, then to bring that in and keep that bringing it in going. It's not just a matter of loading data once, typically setting up at least daily, if not near real time pipeline. Those are pretty sophisticated things for people to do, and companies like Starschema obviously are ready to help with all of that, and using the stacks that we discussed. They all have these capabilities to do that, but just having the capability doesn't mean that it's easy to do or cheap to do or cheap enough to do that you would do it against 1,000 external sources hoping to find 10 that really are useful together with your business. So that's kind of the challenges people have seen in this space. And when we started thinking about how Snowflake could help, we kind of thought back to similar challenges that had happened in the past in terms of how you move data from place A to place B, or how you share data with folks. There's been a long litany of ways to do that. We used to drive to the FedEx before the shipping cut off to FedEx floppy disks across the country, literally in the middle of the night. Like that was one of the original ways. We've shipped tapes of computer tapes around, punch cards. It's all been done. And even to this day, there are people FedExing USB sticks and other physical media. Amazon even has a tractor trailer truck. They'll back up to your data center, plug in a fiber optic cable and suck the data off, and then literally drive it to the Amazon data center. So moving things physically is still happening. But if you look at it's also now possible through everything from the development of the modem to the FTP protocol to the cloud storage mechanisms like S3. Things have gotten easier and faster in order making data from one party available to another. We used to drive down to the Blockbuster to get our movies. Now they just magically appear on our devices somehow. So, this has happened in a lot of other industries. And the key kind of last step of this is all the mechanisms, most of the mechanisms I described, like FTPs, APIs, S3, blob storage, or still mailing physical media, those end up generating copies of the data typically. So the person who created the data gets kind of disconnected from the copy of the data that the person using the data is using. And that means that there's potential challenges. It could be misdirected, lost, stolen, corrupted, and part could go missing. So there's lots of issues when you're operating with multiple copies. And just the way the streaming video streamlined all that. So like the one stream you're watching of your Game of Thrones is coming from more or less the same place as somebody else's. That is also now possible with data. We'll talk about that in a second. So in terms of sourcing data, these are the kind of sources most companies use. They generally extract the data into their data lake, data warehouse. Then they go through transformation and cleaning steps, a standard kind of ETL process. And this is, if you wanted to provide data, you would have to do all this stuff first on your data, then you'd have to deliver it to the other party. And the other party has to kind of, not shown on the slide, like do all the same stuff, but in reverse to figure out how to get the data that you gave them and get it into their data and how to join it up. So in the future, we are now delivering and see a way that data can be shared without moving or copying it, so that all parties can basically be pointing at one copy of the data that the owner of the data can continuously update and make sure is of high quality and always available. People can just immediately get access to query data without having to copy it, move it, compress it, encrypt it, decrypt it, load it, deal with pipe delimiters and all kinds of other stuff. Just immediately get access, reduce the time to value to basically instant. And then also securely get data. And this is data in general about kind of general world patterns and trends, like the weather data or the coronavirus data or the stock market data. There's lots of data where everybody sees the same data when they access it. But there's also lots of data sources where you see kind of your own data. If you connect up to your Facebook ads account, or you connect up to your Google Ads API, you're going to see your own company's data. You're not going to see other companies' data. So this method and process extends and becomes especially important when people are actually not seeing the same data from an individual backend provider. They see personalized data, which makes a lot of the challenges kind of that otherwise would be there just multiply quickly unless it's solved seamlessly. So Snowflake has been kind of working on this problem for the last 7 or so years. Snowflake is effectively a data cloud or a cloud data platform that allows, as one of those layers of the stack that Chris was showing us earlier, allows our customers to do everything from sourcing their own internal data, storing it in data lakes, using it in data warehouse scenarios, performing data science against it, even building their own applications on top of it, and the ETL bit at the beginning to get going. So Snowflake has a big part of the stack that even inside it is multiple layers of a stack. And this is run as a cloud service on Google Cloud, Amazon, AWS, and Microsoft Azure. So Snowflake runs on top of these cloud providers and provides this layer of the stack. And the piece that I'm specifically focused on and talking about in terms of this data sharing is this last bit, the most recent part we added, which is the Snowflake Data Exchange and Snowflake Data Marketplace. And this allows for that discovery aspect so that people can actually find data. And then all the pieces to the left of that make it so that data that one party has can be loaded, cleaned, but then immediately shared with another party once they discover that it's possible to do that. So sharing data in Snowflake securely basically looks like this. Provider of data, like Starschema is a provider of data. Another popular provider that's often used together with Starschema is Weather Source. They have global weather history and forecast data at the very fine level of detail. So those kind of data providers put their data into their Snowflake accounts and then list that data on the Snowflake Data Marketplace. And then consumers of data, people who might want to use that data, when they log into Snowflake, they can see those data sets as being available and immediately just click and get access to it. And when they do that, importantly, they're not making a copy of the data from the provider's account into their account. They're basically getting a pointer back to the provider's copy of the data. And so the person running the analysis can join the data they've gotten from the external party to their own data. So if we're getting coronavirus data from Starschema, we can join that in a SQL join clause to our own sales data or our predicted sales data. And we can immediately start to join that external data together with our own data, look at it in BI systems like ThoughtSpot, feed it into machine learning and predictive algorithms to help kind of understand what's going to happen in the future, but all without having to move or copy the data. I'm not worried about loading, copying it, storing it. I don't even have to pay for storing it if I'm a customer, because I'm just literally pointing to the copy that Starschema is already storing. But I can also use as much of my own Snowflake compute power as I want to run analysis against that data. And correspondingly, Starschema does not have to pay for the compute operations that I do across that data, even though it's stored in their account, not in my account. I can bring my own compute basically to their data and join it seamlessly to my own data as well. And as soon as that data is updated in the underlying system, like whether source or Starschema, my next query will see that new data because we're all on one transactional backbone, basically. Any commits of data on one side will immediately be visible to the person who committed it, but also every other party that has a pointer to that data, which lets people start consuming data much more quickly than they typically would. So this is what the Snowflake Data Marketplace looks like. On the screen on the left here, we have various categories. This shows up right inside the Snowflake user interface. You can see we have, for example, there's a health category in the Starschema. Coronavirus data is in there together with lots of other interesting health data, but we have other categories, especially around marketing data, and weather data is very popular and many other sources. So this is where people can go. It's effectively an app store for data, and it's a collection of data not that Snowflake has sourced or loaded or is sharing from our perspective, but it's our customers sharing and offering data with each other. And some of the data is free and immediately available, like Starschema's data they're providing. Some of the data has a free tier effectively where you can use the weather data, for example, but with certain limitations. And then there's generally paid offerings where folks can charge a premium for their data if applicable as well, all through one place. So that is what I wanted to cover today. And I'm going to hand it to Sean from ThoughtSpot, who's going to take us on the next part of this journey.
Awesome. Justin, thank you so much for that comprehensive overview. And hello, everybody. My name is Sean Zinsmeister from the ThoughtSpot team. I help run product marketing here. Give a quick nod that everybody can see my screen.
You're good.
Wonderful. For those who don't know ThoughtSpot, we are a search and AI-driven analytics company. I like to think of it as we give you the fastest way to access insights from your data. When it comes to analytics, the journey matters. And so the journey of search being the fastest way between question and answer versus some of the more traditional dashboarding tools is really how people and businesses around the world are investing in ThoughtSpot to really increase their speed to insights. So what I wanted to give an overview of today is to kind of bring the entire story of the modern data stack full circle with talking about, we're showing you an example about how we kind of brought this together with Starschema and Snowflake. So what I'm going to show you is everything is built in the Snowflake, and then we've brought in the Starschema COVID data to perform some analysis. And then we're going to show you how to apply it to your business in order to drive impact. But let's start with just the Starschema data first. So what you can see on my screen is this is an example of a pinboard. This is a collection of insights. We like to call it a living dashboard. Everything is completely interactive. And so I can drill into the different parts of the pinboard. So for example, I could grab a piece here. And what I'm doing here is through a technology called Embrace, I'm doing live query right on the data. And so let me show you an example of this interactivity. I can just simply drill down by state, and the visualization will actually respond accordingly, and I can keep going down to the very granular part of the data. How do you make a connection? Let's go over to the data tab, and we'll start there. So what I would do is I go over to my connections tab. In this case, I'm going to select Starschema. And for the sake of the demonstration, I'll edit the connections, the same exact workflow as I would do if I was creating a new one, except that everything's pre-populated for the sake of time. You can see that Snowflake is selected as my cloud data warehouse. I'll enter some connection details. And then what ThoughtSpot's going to go do is it's going to go into Snowflake and actually read some of the tables. And I have the ability to preview the tables that I want to select and the ones that I might want to bring into to then query in ThoughtSpot directly. This is all live query, so I don't have to move the data at all. And so I would go ahead and select the tables that I want, and then I go ahead and then I would update accordingly. So the other thing that I wanted to show you is what does this look like in ThoughtSpot? And so one thing is we should look at what's called a worksheet. And a worksheet is a virtual layer that lives on top of your data that allows you to optimize for search. And so it's taking in, the models that we already have in the Snowflake Cloud Data Warehouse, and it's bringing together the joins and to really give you a window into the data. So you can see that right here, this is a window into your Cloud Data Warehouse, and you can see this is sort of how the joins are actually built. And we offer a visual-based interface in order if you want to adjust the joins very freely there. So let me give you an example about what this actually looks like when we actually apply it to a business use case as well. We're going to go over to the worksheet tab. In this case, we're going to see inventory planning. I'm going to go ahead and look at my schema, and then obviously you can see far more complicated, but what we've done is we're now taking the third-party data from Starschema COVID and then applying it to our inventory planning use case. And then I'll talk to you a little bit about what that looks like in the platform itself. So let's start. Everything's for us starts with search, okay? And so search is the best way to kind of pull information from your data at the fastest speed. And so in this case, let's start by just exploring the Starschema COVID data. So in this case, I might want to look at confirmed cases daily by state. Okay, and then I might want to just narrow this down with a filter. So we're just looking at the Southwest. As you can see, even in the spelling, ThoughtSpot's very forgiving in terms of the flexibility and the experience that's offered in the search bar. Go ahead and I can switch this over to a line chart. Okay, so what we're seeing here is that we can see the number of confirmed cases. However, it's not taking into account the population size and differentiation between a difference between, say, a Texas versus, say, an Arizona. So we're going to have to normalize that. So what we can do, a lot of our customers look at the search bar as kind of ad hoc analysis, which means that I have the flexibility to kind of add queries and take things away at will. And so in this case, I'm going to look at confirmed cases. In this case, is cases per million. We'll go ahead and then again select a line chart. There we go. Okay, so this is actually a better view, but you can still see that we've normalized now for population size, but things are still a little bit spiky. So we're going to update this one more time. And you can see as soon as I start clicking into the search bar, there's a lot of intelligence that's helping me get to my insight faster. What ThoughtSpot's doing through an algorithm called data rank is it's looking at the relationship of the data as well as my user history to understand that these are the things that I might want to get after in my search. We really have brought the best of the consumer web and some of those different consumer search engine experiences that you felt into the ThoughtSpot platform. So in this case, let's do a 7-day moving average, and we'll look at a line chart here. Okay, so this is actually, we can see this is a much smoother, much easier to understand analysis. The other thing to understand here is that the 7-day moving average is a powerful formula that, say, an analyst would have built in this case, and it's being pushed down directly into Snowflake, into my data warehouse. You can see how easy it is and how much faster I can move with no SQL required. And you can see a little bit about what's going on under the hood. I can even take a little bit of a peek at the SQL query just for sake of transparency, as well as with the query visualizer. Okay, so in this case, you can see how easy it is for me to use search to really move around my data and get to different analysis. I can add, I can subtract. The great thing is I really have complete freedom to drill anywhere and sort of add different keywords to explore my data. Now, how do I apply this to my business is really the next question. So what I'm going to do is, in this case, I have an inventory planning data set. Think about a global retail apparel company, say something like a Nike or an LL Bean or something like that. So what we're going to do now is I'm now going to just start with a basic search. It's looking at sales daily, and say in 2019. Let's just look at things by channel. Okay, and so for a little bit of a better picture, we're going to change this to a stacked area chart. Okay, I'm pretty happy with this visualization and the story it tells. It's showing me, the different trends, in-store purchase, online. This is really for last year, and we're going to actually take a look at what this now looks like in the COVID era. But for sake of comparison, I want to build my story. So we have the functionality of pinning. So what I want to do is I'm going to create a pin board, and we'll just call this Starschema webinar for the sake of our demonstration. We'll add it. It's done. All right, so in this case, what we can do now is let's go ahead and just add 2020. Let me go ahead and now remove channel. See how quickly I can just update it, and ThoughtSpot responds to my touch very easily. And you can see, all right, we start to see sales dipping. And now we can actually bring in our Starschema COVID data as well. So we're going to look at COVID. In this case, we're going to look at COVID cases cumulative. We're going to switch this to an area chart. And so you can see total sales, especially as the shelter-in-place orders have started to come in, our sales start to plummet, as well as we see the COVID cases then start to rise. So what I can then do is continue my analysis even further. Let's go ahead and remove that. And let's look at what the effect has been by channel. And again, we'll look at this in a stacked area chart. And as you can see, as in-store purchases start to fall, online starts to pick up. We also have in-store pickup or curbside pickup start to rise as well. So I'm going to go ahead and pin this to my story as well. And let's actually look at one more thing. The Starschema team was talking about, bringing in a lot of the forecasting data as well. And so what I can actually do here is if I take away channel, I can bring my forecasting data together with all of this data as well. So it's really easy for me to merge all this data and really bring it all together under a single search bar. So I might want to look at, my different sales forecasts that I've brought into ThoughtSpot and what that actually looks like. And so I can see my sort of good, better, best types of forecasts in the system. And so I'm going to go ahead and then switch this to a stacked area chart. I'm going to go ahead and pin this. And in this case, we actually probably don't need 2020. We can kill that. Just see how easy and forgiving it is. I'll go ahead and then pin this also to my. Okay, so let's look at kind of what we came up with. So I'll go to the pin board section to kind of see the complete and final story. Here's the Starschema webinar. And here's all my great analysis right here. Everything's interactive. And of course, best of all, I can bring all this into the mobile application as well. So it's all available for me. And so I can see this is the Starschema overview that I actually started with. I can see that all this is like completely interactive and it's all being live queried directly from the application, as well as some of my inventory planning data as well. So you can see how flexible the cloud really gives you as you can move over mediums depending on how you're querying the data. And really now start to understand, how do I actually apply some of this data to my business as well? So I want to thank you for sort of giving you the chance to kind of give you an overview of the platform. I'm going to leave plenty of room for questions. There's lots of ways that you can learn about these 3 different companies that really make up the modern data stack of the future, from Snowflake, ThoughtSpot, as well as Starschema. This is the idea of data sharing and data exchange is something we're hearing a lot from our customers today, and especially in the COVID area, people are looking extra hard at their data and trying to figure out how to drive business value for it. So hopefully this demonstration was helpful and sparked a few questions that I'm going to go ahead now and stop sharing my screen. And then maybe Andrew and the team, we can kind of figure out if there's time for some questions.
Well, that was really great, Sean and Justin and Chris. Really appreciate that. There are a few questions. If anyone has any more questions, please go to the Q&A, and you can ask those questions there. Let me go to the first question here. Give me 1 second. And this would be for I guess it's for Justin. How would you recommend someone get started on their journey to leveraging the modern data stack?
Yeah, so I think we see a lot of people who are starting their journey there, and that starting point is oftentimes either a brand new company that has their data nowhere, kind of greenfield, but more often a company that's been around for a while and has a plethora of existing technology. Many folks are kind of moving off or have moved off the kind of Hadoop-based backends, which they went through, and many are just moving directly from on-premises data warehouse appliances. We see a lot of Teradata and Netezza type equipment still deployed kind of physically at people's facilities. So generally people are looking to move to a cloud native solution. They've decided to go cloud native in general. And so they just kind of start exploring these potential options of the different layers of the stack. And the benefit of that, the vast majority of them, is people can just get access to them online and get a free trial account and put some of their data there, or connect to some data from external sources like we showed today, and just start to see if it meets their needs. So another benefit of these modern stacks is that they are generally very scalable, not only technically, but also organizationally, meaning people can get started literally for free or for tens, hundreds of dollars a month, but can scale up to folks who spend $1 million a month or more on some of these stacks, which is impressive to see a single piece of technology able to address the tiniest to the largest use cases.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for that answer there. Let's see, we also have one for Chris, it looks like. What are the best practices for including machine learning in the modern data stack? You're muted, Chris.
I am, indeed. Sorry about that. I'm not now, hopefully. So probably the most important thing is to understand that machine learning should be integrated into the data stack as an ongoing process. There's a lot that we've learned about that in DevOps and in CI/CD. Relatively little has yet made it into how people build their data stacks. So a lot of the understanding of data and data science and machine learning tasks seems to be very ad hoc. Now, we actually do have a white paper on it. If you go on our website, starschema.com, and look for SAIL, we have an architecture, SAIL, it's the standard architecture for inference and learning, which actually describes just that, just as best practice. So you're welcome to look at it. But the overall idea is to keep it dynamic and consider it an element of data flow rather than something that is just there as a monolithic requirement or something that performs a function. Think of machine learning always as something through which data passes and which passes over your data periodically, and do inference and learning at the same time over that. I think those are probably the key best practices that we think.
Thank you, Christoph. Chris, that was great. Let's see, Sean, we have one for you too. How do I get my data ready for search?
Excellent. I will combine that. I saw another question come in around somebody asking about ThoughtSpot Embrace, and it's actually kind of the same question, but I'm going to go ahead and share my screen because I think that this is kind of a two-part question. Number one, how do I get my data ready for search? So the first thing is, like showed you, there's two ways to really, the idea is that you want to be able to query your data no matter where it resides. A lot of our customers now, especially with the acceleration of the cloud, don't want to move the data. And so having the option to live query a very powerful cloud data platform like Snowflake is where we see a lot of customers going. And ThoughtSpot is really uniquely optimized to handle the speeds and work with the speeds of some of the fastest databases in the world, like Snowflake. So through this, we build a worksheet. So essentially, a lot of the ETL work has already been done if you have a cloud data warehouse. And so how do you derive value from that? Well, the key then is that you sort of bring over a lot of the joins. I showed you the window into your cloud data warehouse, and then we build a worksheet where you can actually then sort of optimize the search experience. This is how we do sort of a prep step to get to that search experience. I can define synonyms, be able to add and subtract column names and change them around, and to really get it easy. And so embrace is when you're doing a live query, is what we call, versus say bringing data in memory and having to move it, which is what some environments do call for in our customer base. That's what we're really talking about. And so a lot of it depends on the use case and sort of getting that data ready, but the cloud data warehouse has really accelerated a lot of the use cases from getting them to ideation into production very fast in a matter of weeks.
That is great. Thank you for those answers. If anyone else has another question, this is the time to ask. Maybe just a few moments, but I don't see anything being typed. Well, I want to thank again our partners, Snowflake and ThoughtSpot, for joining us today and helping us put this together and taking their time to these presentations, as well as Chris. Really appreciate that. And Justin, Sean, you're awesome. And everyone for joining us, thank you for joining us today. We will send you a link to a replay here soon, and hope to see you again for the next webinar. Thanks.